to view this documentary with us tonight, and hopefully you'll stay and participate in some really intense dialogue with our panelists around the film. Tonight, we are presenting the World Trust film called Healing Justice. It is a film about a little bit more than an hour that helps us see that restorative justice is more than a moment. It is actually a movement that is going across our nation for real reasons. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the technician to start the film, and then after the film, we'll transition into our panel discussion. Good evening again, everyone. We're going to move right into the last segment of tonight's event. The film was a lot. I want to again appreciate the opportunity that was provided for us to kind of sit and process it. So we know that this film wasn't easy to watch, but we also believe that if we cannot face and address what is broken, how do we get to a solution? So that's kind of the work that the DRC does. We help people step outside their comfort zone so they can think creatively, and part of that process is to talk about what's really going on. So as we move into this last segment, I'm going to do things a little bit differently than we planned. I want to give each of our panel members a chance to introduce themselves a little bit more and to give some reflection of the film as it relates to the work that they're involved in. And then I'm going to ask if audience members have any questions for our panelists, that you get a chance to do that. I think we have enough time to maybe get a couple questions answered. So I think this conversation is for the community and not just for me. So I want to shift that a little bit, if that's okay. So why don't we start at the end with Dr. Miller? And just, we know the bio is in the program, but just go a little bit about who you are and how this film rests with you.
So my name is Reuben Miller. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Chicago. You got it? Okay. So I teach my name is Okay, thank you. So I'm Reuben Miller. I teach at the University of Chicago in the School of Social Work there. And my research has been on and with people who've been justice involved. So I follow folks who were released from jails, prisons, and detention centers in Chicago, New York, and Detroit primarily. But I've also done some field work in Malmo and Belgrade, Serbia, and in Glasgow. Most of my international field work's been in Glasgow. But okay, so to talk about this very powerful film, I was just struck by some of the resonances between the experiences of the folks who had committed crimes, particularly the young brother who had committed crimes and become a restorative justice counselor, as it were, with the many experiences of the men and women that I followed. And I think the thing that was most powerful for me was how easy it is for kids to make mistakes. And I saw that over and over again. A child would make a mistake, would do something that kids do, like hang out, be in the wrong place at the wrong time, get roped into very adult decisions, make an adult decision as a 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, and then face really adult consequences, but still be a child. And so I was particularly struck by his experiences in the court, how he just didn't understand anything that was happening around and about him. And quite frankly, when I followed men and women, and to some extent the young folks that had participated in my studies, I followed them to court. I'd sit with them as they're being sentenced. I'd be in the room sometimes when they're having conversations with their public defender. And it's very hard to follow. I have a PhD. I've been working with kids for quite some time. I mean, the whole world, the whole legal world is an alien world. You need a $250 an hour lawyer to get through any half of it. So how do I understand if I take what is, juvenile life versus actual life versus, okay, I'll just take this 15 years because it sounds like it's right. Sounds like less than life. And these are the kinds of situations that people face all the time. Anyway, so that part really resonated with me, and also just sort of the power of viewing them as fully human folks. So they're not monsters. They're just people who make probably really bad decisions at different moments in time, like all of us have. That really resonated with me. I think it's something to think about for quite some time.
I'm Carol Kuhnke. I'm a judge, and I have no idea what juvenile life is. That's not a term that we use here in Michigan. So when I heard this young man talking about that being offered to him, I'm quickly considering, well, what would juvenile life be? What is that? So you're certainly not alone in thinking that that it's a foreign language, and it's set up that way. When folks come into court, and I have the feeling often that I want to be closer to the person that I'm talking to. And there's nobody sitting in this auditorium that's as close to me as a child who is charged with a capital offense who might spend the rest of his life in prison. And what I really would rather do is, hold him like this and say, what's going on? Can we talk about this and figure out what you need to become a better citizen and why this happened? And the system just is not set up like that. I bend those rules, and I often do have a closer connection with the folks that I feel like I can reach and that I'm really trying to reach. But I have to say that, as I said before, by the time they get in front of me, the door's almost closed behind them. And an intervention that comes sooner than when they're bound over to circuit court is something that is critical if we're going to turn kids around. And again, I'm talking primarily about kids, but I consider 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds to be kids, 23-year-olds. Some of them just have not had life experience or have not had the guidance to grow into maybe what I was at 22. I hope that I was a little bit of a higher achiever. But they don't have that support or that experience that turns them into someone who's making good decisions at those ages. And in Michigan, a 17-year-old is an adult. 17-year-old can't be charged in the juvenile justice system. They are charged as adults. And that's not even counting folks younger than that who commit serious crimes who could be charged as adults at age 14. That's what touches me.
I'm Lemler, and I'm here, I think, wearing a few different hats, and a lot of the documentary really resonated with me as a social worker, but also the manager for the Juvenile Justice Youth Advisory Board, which DaQuann is a wonderful member of, and also as a restorative justice practitioner. I think I really appreciate what it looks like to really reevaluate the whole system and to realize that we're actually causing harm to those who have been harmed, and that those who are harmed often don't want that type of consequence for someone. They actually want to heal themselves, and that our system doesn't allow for that. I think too that this, to me, really painted a full picture of all the different levels of the impacts of oppression and harm how that manifests. So from like individual and a personal level to institutional and then also to structural. So that this whole our society has this culture of punishment, and this is how we deal with this harm. And in my role at the county as the racial equity analyst, we are looking at these 3 different levels and recently passed a policy, which is awesome, to now get us going into work. But I think a question that I was, that's still itching at me at the end is asking ourselves, how do we change these conditions? How do we actually look at our policies and practices and say, our institutions need to change, like our services really need to change? Just like you were saying, like you were already separated from the young people that you engage with. We need to change that. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what I'm leaving with is prevention. So this is and you know, it's commented at the end that if we do this, it eventually becomes this prevention. And so how do we do both? Respond to the harm and then also preventatively change our systems to be different.
Good evening. My name is DaQuann. I'm here wearing a few different hats as well. Just got appointed by Representative to the Michigan Committee on Juvenile Justice, which is the committee that advises the governor on juvenile justice policies, as well as funding for our juvenile justice system here in Michigan. And I'm a youth advocate for juvenile justice and education. And this documentary really struck me because I was once a youth who lived and was wearing the same shoes as the youth in this film, were a youth with a very traumatized childhood, single-parent household, domestic violence, and me myself get involved in different crimes, from very petty to very major crimes right here in Washtenaw County. And it just struck me to see how more and more around this country it gets worse and worse and worse. And I thought here my situation was worse, but just to see how a county 4 hours away from here, how worse and traumatizing it is there is very scary. And that's why it's a lot, especially to our leaders and people who are empowered. Power is reckless without love. We cannot be so powerful and don't have love, especially dealing with the lives of our young people, because lives can really be changed for that more than the suspect or the victim or the youth. Trickle down to the families, to the educators, to the community as a whole. So as we maintain the power that we have within our own realm, we have to make sure that in every arena that we carry a boldness and a message full of love, and that will really help our community and so forth. And one more thing too, as you know, I'll leave it there. Well, no, I say this too. And just speaking as a black 19-year-old male, like I said, who was once in these shoes, just to see how more real it is in Black America is routinely degraded, and it is weaponized and viewed as a threat to America, and that's just the truth behind it. So therefore, as allies to the African American community, especially the community of young people inside of our juvenile system, should remember the more you benefit from such supremacy, the more responsible you have to be to dismantle it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. At this time, I invite audience members to raise a question for any member of our panel. Yes, Andy.
I'd like to plant a seed. I actually talked to Fundraising from the film when I was in Washington. And what I'd like to do is open the umbrella of restorative justice and go 2 steps back. So restorative justice is great when it works, and it's great when judges allow it to come. But there are cases that are socioeconomic that are brought before the courts that aren't really crimes. They're being charged as crimes. There are cases in which people didn't do the crime, but we've been having this conversation that restorative justice is about accountability, and it's about accepting accountability. But I want to take it 2 steps back. The accountability of racial profiling that occurs when you stop the individual. Or in the case of Latino kids right now in Washtenaw County who see their parents being arrested for crimes and detained or taken away, and they're suffering from PTSD, and they're angry and they may commit something that may be a crime. So is there room to take 2 steps back in restorative justice and broaden the circle to not only be about when somebody is charged with a crime, accepts accountability, or when the prosecutor refuses to reduce it and says we're going forward, they don't have the money to fight it, or they have a past in which their credibility is tarnished. Can we find room in the restorative circle to address those issues so that person can be made whole? If they go to trial, they run the risk of added charges. So I'm concerned about that because that is another significant bottom of the circle.
I'll answer that real quick. So I'm not attached to any job, so I can be very blunt, and I'm very radical. So I wouldn't say, is there any room for us to make it, or you say give it or make whatever, but like let's demand it and create that space for ourselves, because it's not going to be given to us. Because the way the system is, nothing is given to us to make sure that we are okay. They want us away as sure about it, and therefore, you know, demand that space from those officials, because we are the reason why, you know, they are in office in the first place. So, you know, they used to speak all this and that during campaign season and so forth. Hold them accountable to that platform and demand that space, and don't look back. You have to be reckless with this work. If not, we'll continue going on the same cycle.
I think that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. We need pressure from the outside, and I'd just like to, you know, add an additional point of pressure that I think everyday folks can take up. So one, everybody can put that pressure through community-based organizations, organize through people power. In addition, that people power can also show up at the polls, can also have say in, for example, which prosecutors are your prosecutor. There's so much power at the prosecutorial seat that is now beginning to be appreciated at a national level. I'm thinking specifically about Philadelphia, I'm thinking specifically about Larry Krasner. And this prosecutor in Philadelphia says, if you're gonna lock somebody up, other DAs in my office, he says, if you're gonna lock somebody up for more than, you know, for say 10 years, you have to justify, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis, how much it's gonna cost to lock this person up, and then you have to present the cost of locking that person up versus letting go. You have to justify why you, the prosecutor, went for that. This is gonna be attached to your merit. This is how we're gonna do it. So rather than, you know, how many cases did you want to lose, it's how much, this is also part and parcel of what people consider merit. Also, not, Larry Krasner, for example, is not prosecuting sex workers, not prosecuting low-level marijuana offenses, not prosecuting socioeconomic crimes more broadly, like broadly defined. We saw very similar things at the county level in Chicago. So the Cook County board president made a decision not to no longer criminalize, for example, marijuana possession. And so you know, that happened at the county level. And so folks were no longer, she directed Cook County, police officers working in Cook County, but also prosecutors in Cook County, not to charge kids who got caught with marijuana on just the marijuana possession. And that mattered in real ways. And then about the people power and pressure, the Chicago, I mean, just to bring up Chicago is what I'm at this moment more familiar with. I moved back to my hometown, et cetera. The Chicago Bail Fund exerted tons of public pressure, including public media campaigns, and a couple things happened. So thing one is we saw a reduction in the, reduction is the wrong way to put it. Bails are set, there are fewer high bails being set now. And thing two, I think there was some ordinance that got passed just very recently that restricts the amount of bail, and it's in some way connected to people's income. And so anyways, those are different cities, different ways that people have put pressure on the powers that be to bring about just what I think DaQuann is talking about.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Mike.
I have a question. I mean, certainly the prosecutor wanted to, they could start a restorative justice program at the charging stage. But I'm wondering, in terms of starting things up, what do we do within the next 6 months? Do something in Washtenaw County, start taking cases and using them, or do it sentencing, potentially, judge it. Tell me, as an option. But just, how would you do that?
So I'm going to try to repeat the question. The question is, where can we start maybe in the next 6 months? All of the stages or the entry points of restorative justice, can they be identified to start something soon? Would that capture? Okay. I think that's your judge.
I guess that's for me. I would say expressing as a community that this is something that we want. And we have buy-in from many segments of our criminal justice system and its partners. And where we need buy-in is from the prosecutor's office, and that hasn't come yet. But it does take communication from all of the segments. I can give you an example right now where I had a man, I believe he was in his 70s and had been charged here in Washtenaw County in the early 80s with, it appears that he was a pretty significant drug dealer. He absconded and was missing from Washtenaw County until, I believe it was last year, 2017, and was picked up living a quiet, crime-free life in Kentucky, and Kentucky or Tennessee, I can't remember, was brought back to answer charges here in Ann Arbor. He since had served 10 years in federal prison, and but had not committed a new crime in 20 years. This had to have been a little earlier than 2017 because I was new to the criminal docket. And when he was brought in front of me, I had the assistant prosecuting attorney and a public defender in front of me, and I was looking at the case and said, this guy is not a problem for anybody right now. He's been living crime-free for 20 years, quietly in the hills of Kentucky, and I'm inclined to just dismiss the case. That was my thought. Well, I'm just going to throw the case out. And the answer that I got for both the attorneys in front of me, which was legally true, is I can't. I'm not allowed to do that. So this man sat in jail for several months in Washtenaw County while his attorney tried to work out a deal, and couldn't work out a deal. He was tired and pled guilty to all of it, and I sentenced him to the state minimum costs that I have to impose by law. But those are nonsensical decisions, I think, and we need, I should say too, this doesn't really relate to restorative justice with respect to bringing a victim in. These are considered to be victimless crimes, being a drug dealer, and it was a significant crime. But I figured this man has reformed himself on his own. Why are we going to impose anything more on him? And we kept him here in Washtenaw County at our cost, brought him here at our cost.
And one last thing, to be realistic for the next 6 months, I think as we apply pressure to Prosecutor Mackey to bring these services to the court on behalf of the prosecutor's office, I think it's very, very important that we support the DRC both financially and physically, because DRC foot is already in the door, so it doesn't make sense to start something new. Just bring more black volunteers in, bring more money in, so the budget can increase, so more stuff can start getting done in the next 6 months to show the Washtenaw County that we're not here to play games. The lives of our young people are being taken away day by day because of the system, and we are here, we're here to stay. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, DaQuann. Mike, you have something else to add?
Just out of curiosity, just a quick example. Several years ago, my wife had her computer stolen out of a grant library. Someone went over the top of it, and not going to care of that before they paid. So this is, while you work or something. Well, they caught the person, and I'm not sure that she expressed it to anyone else, but certainly to me. And she had wanted to actually talk to the kid who had done it, who was a business school student at Eastern. And she didn't have that opportunity. And I keep wondering if even at the sentencing, that could have, some sort of restorative system could take place under the auspices of the court.
Question?
Okay, so the question was, his wife, John's wife had her computer stolen, and throughout the person who stole it was caught. He was a student, and through the course of the prosecution, she expressed that what she really wanted to do was to talk to him, and that didn't happen. And the question is, how can that happen? And I can say that if it's brought to my attention, I will make it happen. I don't think that I have the authority to put the two of them in a room together with peacemakers and tell them to work it out or help them work it out. But I can bring them both into court and have them at the bench and allow them to speak to each other, and that's something I certainly would be willing to do.
Thank you. We have
I should say also that's not a request that comes through because your wife was most likely working with the Victims Advocate Department in the prosecutor's office.
We have a few more questions, folks who want to ask questions, and I know that I'm on a timeline with the college, so we're going to move through the last three and wrap things up.
So my question's going to pick up on that, I think. One is I'm thinking about what are things that we individually can do to help to live our everyday lives more restoratively so that if we're in one of those situations, A, that we might request for maybe a different kind of practice, and how do we help to make sure that if people are interested, like what do we need to do to help to make it a possibility for people?
Anna?
Do you mean specifically just within the system? No.
Well, I'm thinking every day in our everyday lives, personally, and then so if you are in a situation in the system, that might be a whole other thing, right? You're saying you can't necessarily do that, but if my everyday is not leading me to being more restorative, I'm not going to seek that when I'm in that kind of situation.
I think one thing that sticks out for me with that is that the system generally is so punitive based that to even enter that system is often not restorative. And so if we don't have existing practices that are restorative in that system, then I would ask ourselves, how do we create other supports and other alternatives like diversion or community-based work that allows us to call on each other. And so that might look like us becoming more skilled in restorative practices ourselves so that it's not the police that are called on young people who may be having a conflict, but it's a neighbor who is literally knows how to mediate and knows how to do that and can just calm that down in that moment without police being involved. Or knowing, and then, so it's twofold. I think how do we as individuals in community, how do we equip ourselves to do those practices more? And then how do we just advocate so that we can keep, in the myriad of ways, how do we say that we want these practices in every part of our system? And earlier I was just thinking too that while it's not necessarily a restorative practice, I think looking at best practices around the country is exciting because I know that, for example, in Minneapolis, they actually start the diversion process at policing for adolescents. So it actually doesn't even get to the court system. It literally starts at, for some of the districts, it starts at policing. And the option is, do you want to go through the court system or do you actually want to go through an alternative diversion process? Or, for example, they've even taken it a little back, and the Minneapolis police have sometimes what can often happen is that community members will use police to be their private security or whatever, and that can then cause people to get into the system when they're not even doing anything wrong. And so the Minneapolis Police Department instead will ask people who are calling other questions to actually identify if this is a call that's worth responding to or not, whereas the majority of police departments simply respond because that's what, has to happen. So I think it's looking at all of these different pieces, definitely the courts and looking at the prosecutor's office and then all of these, other ways that we can change what's going on.
And I'll add to that educating ourselves on this work is critical. We have to be present and be willing to learn more. Again, we have time for a couple more questions, so this is number 2.
Not really a question, but an answer to the questions that have been going on. The first and one of the most important things we can do is vote. We have, we're 2 weeks
12 days.
out. Yes, 12 days. And if we do not get to the polls and do not take at least 5 other people with us and make them aware of how important this is, then we just continue the trend. So please take that one step.
So my question is about the prospects of restorative justice practice prior to parole hearings. And so the reason I'm asking this is because as a volunteer for the National Lifers Association, I work with women who have been incarcerated or are in for a very, very long time. And I was recently at my first parole hearing, and the woman had been in for 38 years. And this was her second hearing, and the victims were there for the first time. It was a very tense, unfortunately, a very tense setting. So is this possible at a parole, pre-parole? Is it possible? Is it practiced?
I would say it's possible. That's, parole is governed by the Michigan Department of Corrections, which is run by the governor's office. And if you want to see that, you know who to talk to. Of course it would be possible. I think it would be terrific. I think it would, just as we saw in the film, it would help both sides to understand where the other is coming from. And I think that a lot of folks would be more willing to support someone's request for parole if they had the opportunity to talk face to face and in a less charged environment about what happened and how they felt about what happened.
I want to thank you all, thank Belinda and the folks who put this together. In addition to voting, there's a couple of things that you can do around bailout. There's a lot of people who are incarcerated in jails and county systems for massive amounts of time because they don't have $300 or $600 or $1,000. There is an app out there, it's called Abolition. I can't remember the tag on the back of that, where you can actually give your change. So let's say you go to McDonald's and you spend $2.48 and there's, what's the change now, like 68 cents? Giving that to folks who are trying to get out into the bail fund. And a lot of that money for abolition, they really are connected to trying to get brown, trans, and LGBT folks out of incarceration. Like that's kind of the pile where money goes there first. So if you can find ways to advocate for bail and get folks out of the system at that first juncture, it is powerful and important work. Abolition is the app. It is powerful. So please, and thank you all for being here.
If I could say something about that, we are, with the leadership of Justice Bridget McCormick on the Michigan Supreme Court, Michigan is looking very hard at eliminating pretrial bail. And it's one of the most unfair social justice problems that we have in the criminal justice system, that it's perceived, or that however it was conceived, that the higher the bail, the better you're doing at protecting society, and all it does is ensure that poor people stay in and rich people get out. It's tremendously unfair, and it's contrary even to our Michigan court rules, which provide that the bail should be set in amount, and you should only keep someone in jail pending trial if it's determined that they are a danger to society or that they're likely to flee. Those are the only considerations that are supposed to go into setting bail, and why we have $250,000 bail is beyond me. A person should either be out in society until found guilty, or they should be kept in jail because they're deemed too dangerous. It's not a money game. It should be a yes or no question.
Thank you. To Dr. Miller, who flew in yesterday. Judge Kuhnke, I know you had a docket today. I appreciate you giving us part of your night and your family. Anna, you're busy too. I appreciate it. And DaQuann, so next steps. Again, this is such an important conversation. This work is very dear to the DRC. So let's continue educating ourselves, talk to everyone you know about this work, talk to your family, your personal circles, to your network at work, wherever you are. We have to keep the conversation alive to affect change. I didn't want to say it because I work for a nonprofit. I always want to be careful, but yes, we got to vote. And not just, I don't care who you vote for, but know who you're voting about. That is so important. So look at those ballots, read, understand, and before you cast your vote. So please do that. We think this conversation is so important. We want to continue it into 2019. This film is powerful. It's a lot of stuff we can unpack on it. So pay attention to our social media, particularly Facebook, as we go into the new year. We want to engage the community in small group discussions around this throughout the county. The next 2 voting cycles in this county is going to change the judgeship tremendously. So all the questions that were asked, when you're talking about your prosecutor, how the judges operate, pay attention to what's happening in this county. The next 2 election cycles, well 3 if we include the one in 12 days, will greatly change the bench. So let's keep this conversation going so that we can be informed as we go to the ballot and informed as we apply the pressure to those who make decisions for us. I'm going to stop there because I keep going on. Thank you so much for being here.